After a brutal snowstorm, a retired Navy SEAL and his old German Shepherd went down to town for food and screws to repair his damaged cabin. But when Gideon stepped into North Lantern Market, it was not the groceries or the shelves that caught his attention. It was an
I told you never to come back here. You need to leave right now before I call the sheriff.
And told her to leave. Gideon stayed a few steps away, quietly watching, but Rivet saw Mabel's trembling hands and stepped between her and the man. When the old woman left, Gideon followed at a careful distance and realized her house was barely holding up against the harsh winter. He waited until Mabel went inside, then knocked and returned the heart medicine she had dropped while she tried to hide the freezing room behind her. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and create more meaningful stories. The first heavy snowstorm of the season had left northern Wisconsin looking almost innocent. By morning, Kettlewick Falls sat under a clean white hush. Snow rested on the roofs like flour sifted by careful hands. The narrow streets shone with hard ice where tires had pressed it flat. Smoke rose from chimneys in soft grey ribbons, and from a distance, the town looked like the sort of place where no one could be forgotten. Gideon Marr knew better. Winter had a talent for making hardship look peaceful. It covered broken steps, empty woodpiles, and windows sealed with cardboard. It made silence seem holy, when sometimes silence was only hunger sitting very still. Gideon drove slowly down from his cabin, with Rivet beside him in the passenger seat. At 61, Gideon still carried himself like a man whose bones remembered orders even when his life no longer required them. He was broad-shouldered and square-jawed, with short salt-and-pepper hair, a close-trimmed beard, and grey-blue eyes that rarely gave away what they had already noticed. Under his old field jacket, he wore a brown-grey shirt, the kind of plain, durable thing a man chose when he no longer dressed to be seen. Rivet sat upright beside him, a retired German Shepherd with a black and burnt gold coat, a silvering muzzle, and one scarred ear that never folded quite right. The dog did not fidget. He watched the road the way some old soldiers watched doorways. The storm had taken a corner of Gideon's porch roof and loosened several boards along the back lean-to. He needed groceries first, then screws, lumber, and a patching panel from Otto Blaine's hardware store. It was ordinary work, which Gideon usually preferred. Ordinary work had weight. A board either held or it did not. A screw either bit into wood or spun uselessly. People were harder. He parked outside North Lantern Market, a small grocery store with fogged windows, a bell over the door, and two plastic snowmen leaning drunkenly beside a stack of firewood bundles. Rivet stepped down first, shook snow from his paws, and followed Gideon inside. Warm air hit them with the smell of coffee, oranges, damp wool, and fryer grease from the little deli counter in back. A few customers moved through the aisles with the quiet urgency of people stocking up before the next storm. Gideon took a basket and headed toward the bread. He did not make it there. Near the checkout counter stood an elderly woman in a frayed winter coat, holding a German Shepherd puppy against her chest, as if the little animal were both a burden and the last warm thing left in the world. Her scarf had once been red, but winter and time had faded it toward brown. Her gloves did not match. Wisps of white hair had escaped beneath a knit hat, and her cheeks were pale except for the raw pink the cold had bitten into them. She looked small in the bright store light, not weak exactly, but worn down in the way old fences were worn down, still standing because falling would inconvenience someone. The puppy in her arms was about 11 weeks old, black and brown, with oversized paws, amber eyes, and a red collar that had been scrubbed clean despite its age. His coat was brushed. His ears were half raised. He was not a stray, he was loved. That was what made Gideon stop. People abandoned animals in many ways. Sometimes they did it with excuses, sometimes they did it with lies. But this woman held the puppy like someone carrying a candle through wind, terrified not that it would burn her, but that she would fail to keep it alive. "I told you already, Mrs. Givens," the young man behind the counter said. "You can't bring him in here." His name tag read Travis. He was in his early 30s, narrow-faced, tired around the eyes, with a beard trimmed too short to soften his jaw. He had the look of a man who had been standing too long under fluorescent lights and taking blame for things far above his pay grade. Even so, his voice had a hard edge it did not need. The old woman lowered her head. "I know. I'm sorry. I only thought maybe someone here might know a family." "This is a grocery store," Travis said, "not a rescue shelter." The puppy trembled and pressed his nose under her chin. "I'm not asking the store to take him," she whispered. "He's a good little dog. He just needs a warm place." A woman by the coffee machines glanced over, then quickly busied herself with plastic lids. An older man studying canned soup turned a label around and around without reading it. No one looked cruel. That was almost worse. Cruelty at least had a shape. This was something softer and more common, the way decent people stepped away from another person's humiliation because they were afraid it might ask something of them. Gideon stayed where he was. The old instinct in him wanted to move fast, place himself between the raised voice and the bowed head, end the scene before it bruised her any further. But age had taught him what war had not. Not every rescue began with stepping forward. Sometimes stepping forward too quickly only proved to a wounded person that they had become a spectacle. Rivet disagreed. The old shepherd's ears lifted. His gaze moved from Travis to the puppy, then to the woman's hands. They were shaking badly, not just from cold. Rivet took one slow step, then another, until he stood between the counter and the old woman. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, large and still, a breathing wall of black and gold. The store seemed to notice him all at once. Travis stopped mid-breath. The old woman looked down at Rivet, then up at Gideon with startled embarrassment, as though she had been caught needing help. "Rivet," Gideon said quietly. The shepherd did not move. That alone made Gideon's stomach tighten. Rivet was obedient, but he had never been decorative. When he chose not to move, there was usually a reason. "I don't want trouble," the old woman said. Her voice was so soft that Gideon almost missed it. "No one does," he answered. Travis looked at Gideon's jacket, his posture, the scar along one knuckle, the calm that did not feel like passivity. Something in the young man's face shifted, but pride rushed in to cover it. "Sir, dogs aren't allowed unless they're service animals," Travis said, though the force had gone out of him. Gideon looked at Rivet, then at the puppy. "Understood." The old woman hugged the puppy tighter. "I'll go." She turned to the counter and began setting items down from the crook of her arm. A loaf of cheap bread, one can of chicken soup, a small pack of pain relievers, a packet of dog food no bigger than a man's hand. She counted the folded bills in her palm without moving her lips, then removed the soup. After another second, she removed the dog food too. The puppy made a small sound. "Oh, Cricket," she breathed, and kissed the top of his head. "Don't look at me that way." The name landed gently in the air. Cricket. A foolish name, maybe. A sweet name. The kind of name a lonely person gave a small creature because silence had become too large in the house. Gideon felt something old shift behind his ribs. He thought of his sister Nora, though he did not want to. He thought of her saying she was fine over the phone, always fine, always managing, until one day there had been no more phone calls left to answer. He had sent money. He had meant to visit. He had believed intention was a kind of presence. It was not. The old woman put the bread back too. That was when Gideon moved. Not toward her, not yet. He stepped to the counter, placed his basket down, and added the items she had abandoned to his own. Coffee, eggs, bread, soup, pain relievers, dog food. He did it without ceremony because ceremony made kindness feel expensive. The woman had almost reached the door when a small orange paper slipped from the loose pocket of her coat and fluttered near a rack of batteries. At the same time, a prescription bottle rolled under the edge of a display stand. Gideon bent and picked up the bottle first. The label read Mabel Givens, heart medication. The orange paper lay face up beside his boot. He did not mean to read it, but some words were made to be seen even when a person tried to hide them. Unsafe occupancy denoti. Before Gideon could lift his eyes, Travis spoke from behind the counter. His voice was lower now, less angry, almost afraid. "Mrs. Givens," he said, "tomorrow they're really coming." The old woman stopped with her hand on the door. For one breath, the whole store seemed to hold still with her. The bell above the door shivered in the draft. Cricket tucked his head beneath her chin. Mabel did not turn around. "I know," she said. Then she pulled her scarf higher, stepped outside, and let the white glare of the morning swallow her. Gideon stood with the prescription bottle in his hand. He did not know who was coming tomorrow. He did not know why a woman with heart medicine in her pocket and fear in her shoulders had tried to give away the one creature that still leaned into her. He did not know what kind of house waited for her beyond the bright little town, but he knew the look on her face. It was not the look of a woman trying to get rid of a dog. It was the look of a woman trying to make sure love survived somewhere, even if it could not survive with her. Gideon paid for the groceries and the things Mabel had left behind. Travis rang them up without meeting his eyes. At the door, Gideon paused. "How far does she live?" Travis swallowed. "Out past Birchline Road. Old flower place near the timber cut." "The county notice," Gideon said. "What is it?" Travis looked toward the window, where Mabel's small figure was already moving down the sidewalk. Cricket pressed against her coat. "I called it in," he said. Gideon waited. Travis's mouth tightened. "She fell in the parking lot last week. Wouldn't let me call an ambulance. Said she was fine. People always say that right before they aren't." There was something in the young man's voice then. Not cruelty, not exactly. Something bruised, badly hidden. Gideon looked down at the prescription bottle. "She dropped this." Travis's expression changed. "Then you should return it." Rivet was already at the door, watching through the glass. Gideon stepped outside into the cold. The air struck his face sharp and clean. Across the parking lot, Mabel was walking slowly away from the market, her boots leaving uneven marks in the snow. She held Cricket close, bending around him to block the wind with her own body. Gideon told himself he was only returning medicine. It was a reasonable thing, a decent thing, a small thing. But as he followed the fragile trail of her footprints toward the edge of town, Rivet walking beside him with his head low and his eyes fixed ahead, Gideon knew better. Sometimes cowardice wore the coat of good manners. Sometimes a man called it respect when what he really meant was that he did not want another person's sorrow to become his responsibility. Gideon had made that mistake once. He would not make it again while there was still a pill bottle in his hand, a dog watching the road, and an old woman trying to give away the last warm heartbeat in her arms. Mabel Givens did not look back as she left North Lantern Market. That troubled Gideon more than if she had. People who looked back still expected something from the world. A word, a hand raised in apology, a stranger changing his mind. Mabel walked with her chin lowered, and Cricket pressed tight beneath her coat, moving through the brightness of Kettlewick Falls, as if the town had already finished speaking to her. Gideon waited until she reached the far edge of the parking lot before he followed. He did not hurry. He kept the prescription bottle in his gloved hand, where he could feel its hard plastic shape against his palm. That was his reason. That was the clean explanation. An old woman had dropped her heart medicine, and a decent man was returning it. Rivet walked beside him without pulling the leash. The old German shepherd's head was low, his black and gold body cutting a steady line through the snow. He was not tracking like he used to track in uniform. There was no command, no scent article, no mission word. Still, Gideon could feel the dog's attention fixed ahead, locked on Mabel and the small life trembling in her arms. The street narrowed after the bakery and the post office. The cheerful part of Kettlewick Falls ended almost politely, with a row of little houses wearing wreaths on their doors and smoke lifting from chimneys. Then came Birchline Road, where the ploughs had passed only once, and the snow lay thicker in the tire grooves. Mabel turned there. Gideon stopped for a moment. Beyond Birchline, the town changed character. The painted mailboxes became old metal boxes leaning on posts. The sidewalks disappeared. Bare birches stood along the ditches, their white trunks marked with black scars. Fences vanished beneath snowdrifts. The world grew quieter but not peaceful. It was the quiet of places people had stopped checking. Rivet looked up at Gideon. "I know," Gideon murmured. The dog blinked once, then continued forward. Mabel's house sat at the end of a narrow lane half covered by blown snow. It rested beneath a cluster of old pines, small and tired, with a sagging roof and a strip of torn blue tarp flapping over one corner like a bandage that had given up. Cardboard covered part of one window. The porch steps leaned to the left. No smoke rose from the chimney. The house did not seem abandoned. It seemed embarrassed. Mabel climbed the steps carefully, one hand around Cricket, the other gripping the railing as though it might betray her. The puppy lifted his head and looked back once. Even from a distance, Gideon saw the amber flash of his eyes. Then the door opened, and both of them vanished inside. Gideon stood at the edge of the yard longer than necessary. A younger version of him would have crossed the distance immediately, knocked hard, and solved whatever stood in front of him. That man had been useful in places where hesitation could kill. But this was not a battlefield. This was a woman's home, however wounded it looked. A home deserved to be entered with humility, not conquered with concern. He waited until his breath had slowed. Then he climbed the porch. The wood groaned under his boots. Rivet stopped at the bottom step and stared at the door, ears forward, body still. Gideon knocked gently. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then something scraped inside. A latch turned. The door opened just wide enough for Mabel's face to appear in the gap. Up close, Gideon saw what the grocery store lights had hidden. Mabel had soft grey eyes set deep in a face lined by weather, grief, and the careful manners of someone who had spent years apologizing before asking for anything. Her white hair had come loose beneath her hat. Her mouth trembled, but pride held her spine straighter than her body wanted. "You dropped this," Gideon said, holding out the bottle. Mabel looked at the label, color drained from her face. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, Lord, I didn't even know." She opened the door a little wider and took it with both hands, as if he had returned something more fragile than medicine. "Thank you, Mr. Marr," he said. "Gideon Marr. Thank you, Mr. Marr." Behind her legs, Cricket pushed his small head through the gap. The puppy saw Rivet and gave a thin, uncertain whine. Rivet did not step forward. He simply watched past Mabel into the dark of the house. Mabel noticed. Shame moved across her face quickly, like a curtain being pulled shut. "I should let you get back," she said. Gideon looked at the puppy, then at the woman's blue fingers curled around the pill bottle. "At the market," he said carefully. "You mentioned finding a warm place for him." Mabel lowered her eyes. "I shouldn't have done that in public. I'm not here to judge it." Most people said that before they judged anyway, and Mabel seemed to know it. She held Cricket closer, though the puppy had already slipped halfway down toward her feet. "I don't want charity," she said. "No, ma'am. I don't want people talking." "I don't either." That earned him the smallest glance, suspicious and tired. Gideon nodded toward Cricket. "If you need a few days, I can keep him safe while you sort things out. Temporary. Food, warmth, no questions." The words were meant to be gentle. They struck her like a hand. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. For a moment she looked beyond him at the snow-covered yard, as though she were searching for some version of herself that still knew how to refuse. "You would do that?" she asked. "I would." Cricket stepped onto one of Mabel's worn slippers and sat there, pressing his little body against her ankle. Mabel looked down at him. Her face changed in a way Gideon could not name. It was love, certainly, but love mixed with apology, and apology mixed with something close to defeat. "You'd be better off," she whispered to the puppy. "Don't make that face." Cricket's tail tapped once against the floor. A breath of air moved through the doorway. It came from inside the house, and it was colder than the air outside. It carried the smell of damp wood, old cloth, medicine, and something metallic beneath it, faint but wrong. Rivet's head lifted sharply. Gideon saw it. Mabel saw him see it. "I keep the back room closed," she said too quickly. Storm pushed water in. The lie was not meant to deceive. It was meant to protect what little dignity she had left. Gideon did not challenge it. "May I step in long enough to put these down?" He lifted the grocery bag. Mabel looked at it, and her expression tightened. "I didn't ask you to buy those things." "No." "Then why did you?" "Because they were already on the counter." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. For a proud woman, even a loaf of bread could arrive with teeth. But Cricket coughed then, a small dry sound, and Mabel's resistance broke by a fraction. She opened the door wider, only for a minute. Inside, the cold had weight. It did not merely fill the rooms. It sat on the table, clung to the curtains, breathed from the floorboards. Gideon could see his own breath. A black iron heater stood near the wall, with a dented grate, and a box of damp matches beside it. A few thin sticks of wood waited nearby like a joke no one had the heart to tell. The ceiling over the sitting room had a hole where storm water had come through. Someone had set a cooking pot beneath it. The water inside had frozen into a cloudy disk. Around the pot, the floorboards were stained dark. The kitchen shelves held half a bag of flour, a jar of tea, 2 cans without labels, and a chipped mug turned upside down to keep dust out. On the table lay medical bills, a county envelope, and a photograph in a cracked frame. Gideon paused at the picture. A younger Mabel stood in front of the same house, though it had looked alive then. Window boxes overflowed with purple pansies and white chrysanthemums. A tall man in suspenders stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, both of them squinting into sunlight. There was color everywhere. Mabel followed his gaze. "My Arthur built those boxes," she said. "Said a house ought to have flowers, even when the world had no manners." There was humor in the line, but it had traveled a long way to reach her mouth. "He passed?" Gideon asked. 7 winters ago." Cricket had curled himself across her slippers again, his chin resting on the swollen top of one foot. Mabel's hand lowered to his head automatically. "He belonged to the Holloway place first," she said. "Neighbor died in October. Her nephew was giving away the last of the litter. Cricket was the quiet one. Too clingy," he said. A faint smile touched her face. "I thought quiet and clingy sound about my speed." Gideon set the grocery bag on a chair rather than the table. It felt less like claiming space. "He watches you close," he said. "He fusses." Mabel rubbed the puppy's ear. "When I forget breakfast, when my chest gets tight, when I sit too long. He climbs right on my feet and complains like a tiny old man. Sounds useful. He's a baby. Babies can still know things." Mabel looked away. The sentence had landed somewhere tender. For a while the house made all the noise. Wind touched the tarp outside. A drop of meltwater clicked somewhere in the wall. The old heater ticked once, though no fire burned in it. Then Mabel said, "The county is coming tomorrow." Gideon stayed quiet. "I fell last week at the market." She spoke toward the photograph instead of toward him. Young Travis saw. I told him I was fine. I was not fine, but a person gets tired of being collected by strangers. Her fingers tightened around the prescription bottle. "If they say that the house isn't safe, they'll move me somewhere temporary. Just until repairs, they say. But temporary is a dangerous word when you're old. It can swallow a whole life and still sound polite. And Cricket?" Her face folded. "They don't take dogs." The puppy raised his head at his name. Mabel swallowed. "I thought if I found him a family before tomorrow, then at least one of us wouldn't be carried off by people with clipboards." The words were simple. That made them worse. Gideon looked around the room again. The frozen pot, the dead heater, the cracked window patched with cardboard, the table full of bills. None of it was dramatic in the way stories liked suffering to be dramatic. There was no single villain standing in the corner. Only age, weather, money and time, each taking a small bite until almost nothing was left. He reached into his wallet and took out what cash he had. He placed it on the table, then immediately moved it away from the bills and closer to the grocery bag. "This is not for the dog," he said. Mabel stared at the money as if it had insulted her. "Mr. Marr, it's for food, for his food, for a few days of breathing room while you decide." "I already decided." "No," Gideon said gently. "You prepared to lose." That made her look at him. Her eyes sharpened. For the first time, Gideon saw the woman who had once filled windows with color in January. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "No, Mom, I don't." "Then don't speak like you do." He accepted the correction with a small nod. Fair. The silence after that was not comfortable, but it was honest. Mabel reached for the back of a chair, and her breath hitched. It was slight. Most people might have missed it. Cricket did not. The puppy sprang up, put both front paws against her shin, and whined with a high, urgent sound. Not fear, warning. Mabel touched her chest. "It passes," she said. Gideon did not move toward her. He wanted to. Every part of his training hated watching a person struggle from across a room. But he remembered the way she had said, "Don't speak like you do." So he stayed still and asked, "Do you want your medicine?" She took one breath, then another. "Yes," she said, and the word cost her. Gideon handed her the bottle. She swallowed a pill with water from the chipped mug, then leaned against the table until color slowly returned to her mouth. Cricket stayed pressed to her leg the entire time, trembling but refusing to hide. "That's what I mean," she said after a moment. "He shouldn't have to learn the sound of me coming apart." Gideon looked down at the puppy. Cricket stared back with solemn amber eyes and one ear tilted sideways, as if he had been born with too much concern and not enough skull to hold it. "He may not see it that way," Gideon said. Mabel gave a tired laugh with no joy in it. "Dogs don't get a vote." Rivet shifted near the door. Gideon followed the movement and saw half hidden beneath Cricket's little blanket near the stove a folded form. Mabel turned to set the mug down, and the edge of the paper slid into view. Voluntary animal surrender. The signature line was blank. Gideon did not pick it up. He did not need to. Mabel saw where he was looking. Her cheeks flushed. "I haven't signed it. I didn't ask. I put it there so I'd be brave enough tomorrow." The words broke something open in the room. Not loudly, not with tears, more like ice cracking under snow. A sound almost too soft to hear until you realized the surface could no longer be trusted. Gideon bent and lifted the grocery bag again, placing it on the kitchen counter where she could reach it. Then he put the cash beneath the edge of the flour sack, not hidden exactly, but not displayed like a wound. "I'll come back in the morning," he said. Mabel shook her head. "You have your own roof to fix. It can wait. Roofs don't wait in Wisconsin. Mine will. You can't fix this in a morning." "No." That answer seemed to surprise her more than a promise would have. Gideon looked at the dead heater, the ceiling hole, the little dog on her foot, the unsigned form near the blanket. "I'm not promising to fix everything," he said. "People who have lost enough can smell a false promise before it leaves the mouth." Mabel's eyes softened, but only a little. "What are you promising then?" "That I'll be back before they are." Outside, the wind moved under the porch boards with a low, hollow note. Cricket turned his head toward it, then looked up at Mabel, waiting for her to tell him whether the world was safe. She did not answer him. She only bent slowly, with effort, and touched the red collar around his neck. Gideon stepped back to the door. Rivet rose and waited for him at the threshold. As Gideon left the house, the cold outside felt cleaner than the cold inside. That troubled him. Weather was supposed to be the enemy in winter. but sometimes the worst cold was the kind that learned a person's name and sat down in their kitchen. He walked back down the lane with Rivet beside him. He did not look back until he reached the bend. Mabel stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, Cricket tucked against her ankles. The blue tarp snapped above her like a tired flag. Gideon lifted one hand. She did not wave back, but she did not close the door until he was gone. Gideon Marr returned to Mabel's lane before the county ever had a chance to come. Morning had not fully warmed the sky. The snow along Birchline Road held a blue tint, and the pines around Mabel's house stood black against it, their branches heavy and still. Gideon's truck moved carefully over the rutted lane, its bed loaded with groceries, a roll of insulation, a canvas tool bag, 2 old but solid planks, a box of screws, and a patched sheet of roofing panel that had seen better days but still knew how to keep weather out. He had stopped first at Blaine Hardware, a narrow, cluttered shop that smelled of sawdust, kerosene, pipe tobacco, and old arguments. Otto Blaine had been behind the counter before sunrise, as Gideon had expected. Otto was 69, barrel-chested and short-legged, with a red-grey beard that spread over his coat collar like a winter bush. His hands were thick, scarred, and permanently dry from years of handling lumber, nails, rope, and stubborn people. He spoke to everyone as if they had interrupted him, even when he had been waiting for them. Old soldiers. Otto had grumbled while loading scrapboards into Gideon's truck. Always better at finding trouble than finding receipts. "You putting it on my account?" Gideon had asked. "You don't have an account. I do now." Otto had squinted at him, then at Rivet, who sat patiently beside the truck with snow dusting his muzzle. "That dog looks like he knows something you don't. He usually does." Otto had cursed softly, added another bundle of wood, and waved Gideon off before gratitude could make the morning awkward. Now Gideon parked beside Mabel's porch. Rivet jumped down first, landing lightly despite his age. The old shepherd paused in the yard and lifted his nose. His ears shifted forward. Gideon noticed. The house looked worse in daylight. The blue tarp over the roof snapped weakly in the wind. A long icicle hung from the broken gutter. The cardboard in the window had softened around the edges where meltwater had touched it and frozen again. The place did not seem angry at the world. It seemed exhausted by it. Mabel opened the door before Gideon knocked. She wore the same faded coat over a long house dress, with a knitted shawl pulled around her shoulders. Her white hair had been pinned back in a loose knot, though several strands had already escaped. There was pride in the way she stood, and fear in the way one hand rested near the doorframe, ready to close it if kindness came too fast. "You came early," she said. "County comes early when you don't want them to," Gideon answered. A flicker of humor touched her eyes despite herself. "That sounds like wisdom bought at a high price." Mostly irritation. Cricket appeared between her slippers, the little German shepherd pup wide-eyed and solemn, his red collar crooked from sleep. When he saw Rivet, he gave one sharp bark, then retreated behind Mabel's ankle as if embarrassed by his own courage. Rivet did not react. He looked past the puppy into the house. Gideon carried the first bag inside. "I'd like to look at the heater and the roof before anyone official starts writing things down." Mabel's face tightened. "Mr. Marr, I'm not looking to become your charity project. I didn't bring charity." He lifted the canvas tool bag and set it gently on the floor. "I brought screwdrivers. They're rude little things. Don't know how to pity anybody." For half a second, Mabel only stared at him. Then a dry, surprised laugh escaped her. It was not large. It did not transform the room. But Cricket's ears lifted, and even Rivet turned his head, as if laughter inside that house was rare enough to deserve attention. "Well," Mabel said, recovering herself, "tell your screwdrivers to wipe their feet." The room was colder than Gideon liked, not just underheated, but deeply cold, as if the walls had stored winter in their bones. He opened the tool bag and knelt beside the old heater. Its metal grate was dented, the ignition switch stuck. A smear of dark soot marked the lower edge of the casing. Rivet came near, sniffed once, and backed away. That was not normal. Gideon glanced at him. "You don't like it?" Rivet stared at the heater, then lifted his head toward the ceiling. Mabel noticed and folded her arms. "That dog looks judgmental. He's retired military. Judgment is part of the pension." That earned another small laugh, thinner this time but real. Cricket waddled toward the tool bag, sniffed a hammer, and barked at it with deep suspicion. "That hammer deserves it," Mabel said. "Arthur once hit his thumb with one, and blamed the nail for having poor character." The name softened the room. Gideon looked toward the cracked photograph on the table, the one of Mabel and the tall man beside flower boxes bursting with color. "He built those window boxes?" Gideon asked. "He built them crooked," Mabel said, "but he loved them straight." She lowered herself carefully into the old chair near the center of the room. Cricket immediately climbed onto her slipper and sat there as if guarding a kingdom the size of 2 worn feet. Mabel watched Gideon work for a while. In January, she said, "I used to keep pansies in the front window. Folks thought flowers in deep winter were foolish. Then they bought them anyway. For themselves, for whoever had gone quiet in their house." Her eyes stayed on the dead heater. A funeral, a sick mother, a fight between sisters, a man trying to apologize without saying the word sorry. Flowers were useful that way, pretty enough to carry what people were too proud to say. Gideon loosened the first panel on the heater. Dust fell across his gloves. There was more soot inside than there should have been. "When did people stop coming?" he asked. Mabel smiled, but it did not reach her face. "They didn't stop all at once. That would have been impolite. First they came less, then only at Christmas. Then they waved from the road. Then one day, nobody needed flowers badly enough to drive through snow. Outside, wind slid under the porch boards and made them hum. Rivet suddenly rose. He did not bark. He walked to the middle of the room and stood with his front paws stiff, nose angled upward. His scarred ear twitched once, then again. He took 2 steps toward Mabel's chair, stopped, and looked at Gideon. Gideon held still. The house made a sound so small it nearly disappeared beneath the wind. A faint tick, then silence. Mabel frowned. "What is it?" Gideon listened. Nothing. Cricket, however, had gone quiet. The puppy no longer bothered the hammer. He stood beside Mabel's chair, staring at Rivet as if waiting for instruction from an older priest. Gideon rose slowly. "I'm going to look at the roof patch from outside. You think it's bad? I think the house is talking. I'd rather answer before it raises its voice." Mabel looked toward the ceiling. For the first time that morning, annoyance left her face and something smaller took its place. Fear. Gideon took the ladder from the truck and set it against the low side of the porch roof. It was not a full climb, but the snow made every step treacherous. He cleared enough with his boot to find footing, then climbed up with the roofing panel tucked under one arm. From there he could see the damage properly. The storm had torn the tarp loose near the seam, and beneath it the old roof boards were darker than they should have been. Rot. Not just new damage, old damage dressed up by fresh snow. He worked fast, but not carelessly. He set the panel, lined up the edge, drove the first screw. The bit caught. The second screw went in harder. The third spun uselessly, biting into wood that had almost given up being wood. Below him, Rivet barked. One short, hard bark. Gideon froze. Inside the house, Mabel said something he could not hear. Cricket yipped. Then came the crack. It was louder this time, a splintering complaint from somewhere under the roof line. Gideon dropped the drill and scrambled down the ladder, boots sliding on the rungs. By the time he hit the porch, Rivet was already through the open door. The old shepherd did not leap wildly. He drove straight to Mabel's chair and shoved his shoulder hard against its side. The chair skidded. Mabel cried out as she tipped sideways, landing against the folded quilt near the wall. Cricket barked in frantic, high bursts. A rotten length of wood fell from the ceiling and struck the floor exactly where the chair had been. It shattered into damp splinters. For a moment, nobody moved. Dust drifted through the cold air like grey snow. Gideon reached Mabel in 2 strides. "Are you hurt?" She stared at the broken wood, her mouth open but soundless. Her hands trembled in her lap. Cricket climbed onto her knees and pushed his face under her chin, whining so hard his little body shook. "I'm all right," she whispered. Gideon had heard those words too often to trust them. He checked her head, her shoulders, her hands. No blood, no obvious break. But her breathing was too quick, and her lips had lost color. Rivet stood near the heater now, not near Mabel, not near the fallen wood. The heater. He sniffed the lower vent, stepped back, and stared at Gideon with the terrible patience of a dog waiting for the slow human to understand. Gideon turned, the soot stain, the dead ignition, the metallic smell under the damp wood. Rivet's refusal to lie near the heater. "Don't move," Gideon said. Mabel tried to push herself up. "I said I'm all right. I heard you. That means let an old woman keep 1 ounce of dignity. It means stay still until I know the house isn't poisoning you." The words struck the room flat. Mabel stopped. Gideon pulled the heater panel open wider and angled his flashlight inside. The vent pipe behind it was old, blackened near a seam, and cracked along one edge beneath a crust of soot. Not enough to make a dramatic hiss, not enough to announce itself like danger in a story. Enough to leak quietly, day after day, into a room where an old woman had been blaming her own failing heart for every dizzy spell. Gideon shut the unit off, then moved to the nearest window and worked the swollen frame until it opened an inch. Cold air pushed in. He opened the door next. Mabel pulled the shawl tighter. "You'll freeze the house." The house can freeze. You can't. He took out his phone and called 911 first. Then he called the local clinic number printed on one of the medical papers on the table. He gave the address, Mabel's age, her heart condition, the possible carbon monoxide exposure, the near fall, the broken ceiling timber. Mabel listened, face pale with humiliation. I didn't want sirens, she said. I know. People will see. Let them. Her eyes flashed. Easy for you. No, Gideon said, and surprised himself with the sharpness of it. He softened his voice. No, Mom. It isn't. For a moment, something passed between them that was not friendship yet, not trust, but the first thin board laid across a dangerous gap. Cricket shifted against her chest and gave a low, worried whine. Mabel looked down at him. Her expression broke in a way Gideon almost wished he had not seen. He knew, she said. Gideon followed her gaze. The puppy pressed his ear against her sweater, right over her heart. He was shaking, but he did not run. His eyes were squeezed shut as if he were trying, with all the power in his small body, to hold her together from the outside. He fusses every time, Mabel whispered. Every time I get tight in the chest. I thought he was scared of me. Gideon looked at Rivet, standing watch by the open door, snow blowing in around his paws. Maybe he was scared for you. The words settled quietly. No miracle appeared. No wound vanished. The heater was still broken. The ceiling still had a hole. The county would still come. But Mabel lowered one hand onto Cricket's back, and this time she did not apologize to him for needing comfort. In the distance, sirens began to rise, soft at first, then clearer. Mabel closed her eyes. I hate this. I know. I hate needing strangers. Gideon crouched beside her, not too close. Then don't call them strangers yet. Call them witnesses. She opened her eyes. To what? He glanced at the fallen timber, the open door, Rivet, Cricket, and the cracked heater that had been breathing harm into the room without ever raising its voice. To the fact that you made it this far. The ambulance lights appeared through the trees a minute later, red flashing against the snow and the trunks of the pines. Gideon stepped outside to guide them in, but before he left the doorway, he looked back once. Mabel sat wrapped in her shawl, small and furious and alive. Cricket lay across her lap, his head tucked under her hand. Rivet stood between them and the broken room, like an old oath that had not forgotten its purpose. County had not arrived yet, but danger had, and it had not worn a badge or carried a clipboard. It had hidden in rotten wood, a cracked vent pipe, and all the long days when no one had knocked. The clinic in Kettlewick Falls was small enough that everyone in town knew which chair creaked in the waiting room. It stood between a dentist's office and a closed tax service, a low brick building with frosted windows and a wreath on the door that had lost most of its red berries to weather. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, damp coats, and the faint sweetness of cough drops melting in paper cups. Mabel Givens had been taken behind a pale blue curtain nearly 20 minutes earlier. Gideon Marr sat in the waiting room with his back to the wall and Rivet lying at his feet. He had chosen the chair without thinking. Old habits had long roots. Even here, among children's magazines and a plastic fern, part of him still wanted to see the door. Cricket lay under the chair beside Gideon's boots, exhausted from fear. The little German shepherd puppy had stopped whining, but his amber eyes remained fixed on the hallway where Mabel had disappeared. Every few seconds, his ears twitched at some sound too small for people to notice. Rivet watched him with grave patience. You're a mess, Gideon murmured. Cricket blinked, then placed his chin on Gideon's boot as if the criticism had been accepted and filed away. A nurse came through the hallway carrying a clipboard. Her name tag read April. She was in her late 40s, broad-faced and calm, with dark hair twisted into a bun and the practiced kindness of someone who had learned how to move quickly without making frightened people feel rushed. She stopped near Gideon. Mrs. Givens is stable, she said. Doctor's still checking her oxygen level and heart rhythm. She's shaken up, but she's talking. Gideon nodded once. Possible exposure? Could be. We'll know more after tests. You did right getting her out and opening the house. He accepted the words without comfort. Doing right after nearly missing the danger did not feel like victory. It felt like arriving at a bridge after the boards had already started to break. April glanced down at Cricket. That the puppy? Yes. He cried until we let him sit outside the exam room. Cricket's ears lifted at her voice, but he did not leave Gideon's boot. He belongs to her, Gideon said. April's expression softened. I guessed. The front door opened, and cold air slid across the waiting room. Travis Holland stepped in carrying 2 paper grocery bags against his chest. He had changed out of the store apron, but not out of the shame. Without the counter between him and the world, he looked younger, thinner. Snow clung to his boots, his narrow face was pale, and his trimmed beard did nothing to hide the tightness around his mouth. He saw Gideon first. Then he saw Cricket. The puppy's head came up. For a second, neither moved. Travis lowered the bags onto a chair as carefully as if they contained glass. Bread, milk, canned soup, batteries, a flashlight, and 2 small bags of puppy food peeked from the top. "I didn't know where else to put these," he said. Gideon looked at the bags, then back at him. "You brought them here. Brilliant observation." The old bite was still in Travis's voice, but it had no teeth left. Cricket slipped out from under the chair and walked toward him. Not happily, not trustingly. He moved with the solemn caution of a small animal who remembered fear, but had not yet learned what to do with forgiveness. Travis bent one knee, then stopped himself, unsure if he had earned even that. "I'm sorry, little man," he whispered. Cricket sniffed the edge of his coat sleeve. Then the puppy did something strange. He took the fabric gently between his teeth and pulled once. Travis froze. All the color left his face. Gideon saw it. So did Rivet, who lifted his head but did not rise. Travis sat down hard in the chair beside the grocery bags. "He did that last week," Travis said. His voice had gone flat, as if the words came from a room far behind him. Gideon waited. In the parking lot. Mrs. Givens came out with medicine and a loaf of bread. She made it maybe 10 steps before she grabbed the side of a truck and went down. Not all the way. More like her legs forgot the arrangement. He swallowed. "The puppy started pulling my sleeve just like that. Wouldn't stop. I thought he was being a nuisance until I saw her." Cricket released his sleeve and sat between Travis' boots. Travis stared at him. "I called Adult Protective Services," he said. "That was me." Gideon did not answer immediately. Travis let out a short, bitter laugh. "Go ahead. Say it." "Say what?" "That I should helped instead of shouting at her in front of half the town." "You should have." The honesty struck cleanly. Travis looked down. "My mother used to say she was fine," he said after a while. "Fine when she couldn't keep food down. Fine when she missed work. Fine when the doctor told her she needed treatment she couldn't afford. She was proud too. Everybody in this town is proud. Must be something in the well water." His hands tightened together. "I was 17 when she died. Found her in the kitchen before school. Still had her slippers on. I hated her for saying fine so many times. Then I hated myself for believing her." The waiting room grew quiet around him. A child coughed somewhere behind another door. The coffee machine clicked. Snow slid from the roof outside in a soft thump. Travis wiped his palms on his jeans and gave Gideon a look that was almost defiant. "So when I saw Mrs. Givens fall and refuse help, I called. I thought that was the right thing. Then she came in today with him, trying to give him away, and I got scared. Angry. I don't know. I heard my mother's voice coming out of her mouth, and I wanted to shake the whole world until it stopped lying." He looked toward the hallway. "Instead, I took it out on an old woman." Before Gideon could respond, the curtain at the far end of the hall moved. April helped Mabel step into the doorway of a small consultation room. Mabel had a blanket around her shoulders and a hospital bracelet on one thin wrist. She looked smaller under the clinic lights, but her eyes were clear. Travis stood so fast the chair scraped. "Mrs. Givens." Mabel looked at the grocery bags, then at his face. "Oh," she said softly. "You came." "I called them," Travis said. "The county last week. After you fell." "I suspected." His mouth opened, then closed again. "I was scared," he said. "That doesn't excuse how I spoke to you." "No," Mabel replied. The word was gentle, but it did not rescue him. Travis accepted it with a nod. Mabel studied him for a long moment. "Doing the right thing in a cruel way still leaves a bruise." Travis flinched as if she had struck him. Then Mabel's expression eased by the smallest degree. "But bringing bread is better than bringing only excuses." Cricket trotted to her and tried to climb her leg. April helped Mabel sit in a chair, and the puppy immediately pressed against her ankle. The clinic door opened again before the room could settle. A man in a dark wool coat entered with snow on his shoulders and a leather folder under one arm. He was in his early 40s, tall but slightly stooped from desk work rather than age, with sandy brown hair combed back too neatly and a clean-shaven face drawn tight by worry. His glasses had fogged from the cold. He removed them, wiped them once, and looked around until he saw Mabel. Aunt Mabel. Mabel closed her eyes for half a second. "Hello." "Dane." Dane Givens crossed the room quickly, then stopped short of embracing her, as if unsure whether he had arrived as family or authority. Gideon noticed the hesitation. It told him more than a hug would have. Dane looked at the blanket around her shoulders, the puppy at her feet, the grocery bags, Gideon, Rivet, then Travis. His face hardened in layers. "What happened?" Mabel lifted one hand. "A dramatic morning. I don't recommend them. This isn't funny. It was not meant to be. It was meant to keep me from crying. Dane's jaw worked once. He turned to Gideon. Are you the man who called? Yes. And you were at her house, why? Gideon held his gaze. Returning medication she dropped, then checking a heater that turned out to be unsafe. Dane looked back to Mabel. Fear sharpened his voice. I told you that house was too much. You told me from Duluth, Mabel said. Everything sounds simple from Duluth. That landed. Dane looked away. April stepped in before the air split further. Dr. Renner will talk with everyone in a moment. Dr. Elise Renner arrived with the quiet authority of a woman who had spent years giving difficult news without letting it become colder than necessary. She was in her late 50s, tall and spare, with brown skin, silver-threaded black hair cut to her jaw, and reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. Her voice was low, steady, and impossible to hurry. Mrs. Givens did not have a major cardiac event, she said. That is the good news. But her heart condition is serious, and today's stress, cold exposure, and possible carbon monoxide exposure made a dangerous combination. She cannot return to the same conditions without changes. Mabel's fingers closed around Cricket's collar. Dane heard the part he had expected to hear. Then she needs to leave. For tonight, she should be monitored, Dr. Renner said. After that, the living situation needs to be evaluated. Dane opened his folder. I've spoken with a respite care facility outside Ashland. They have a room, meals, medication schedule, nurses. No, Mabel said. Aunt Mabel. No, they can keep you safe. Her hand shook once on Cricket's head. Will they take him? Dane's silence answered before his words did. It's temporary, he said. Mabel looked down at Cricket. Temporary. The word seemed to pass through her like winter through a cracked wall. Dane's voice grew rough. I cannot let you die for a dog. Mabel looked up at him then, and for a moment she was not frail at all. And I cannot live if the last thing that loves me is taken away because everyone else arrived too late. No one moved. Even Travis looked down. Gideon felt the sentence settle into the room. It did not accuse one person. It accused all of them, including him. The final arrival came near dusk. Clara Voss entered with a county badge clipped to her coat and a tablet tucked beneath her arm. She was 46, medium height, with ash-blonde hair cut blunt at her shoulders, and a face that looked plain until she spoke, then became precise and alive with attention. She wore no softness for decoration, but her eyes were not unkind. They were the eyes of someone who had learned that compassion without structure could get people hurt. I'm Clara Voss, she said, Adult Protective Services and Housing Safety Liaison. Mabel sighed. That sounds like 3 jobs wearing 1 coat, Clara almost smiled. Some days it feels like 5. She listened first. That surprised Gideon. She let Dr. Renner explain the medical concerns, let Dane describe the respite care option, let Mabel say she wanted to remain home, and let Gideon explain what he had found at the house. Then Clara spoke plainly. No one is punishing you, Mrs. Givens, but the house cannot stay as it is. If you return to unsafe heat, suspected vent problems, a compromised roof, blocked exits, and no emergency plan, then the county has to act. Mabel's face closed. Clara continued. Gentler now, but action does not always mean removal. It means we need minimum safety conditions. Dane frowned. What conditions? Clara looked at Gideon. 48 hours for temporary stabilization, assuming the clinic clears her for discharge with monitoring. Heat source shut off until repaired or replaced. Carbon monoxide detector, smoke detector, clear walking path, roof hazard blocked or braced, daily check-in plan, medication plan, emergency contact, follow-up with the clinic. Gideon nodded slowly. Dane stared at him. You think you can do all that? Gideon did not answer right away. Rivet stood beside his chair, calm as stone. Cricket remained at Mabel's feet, his small body pressed against her slipper. I think, Gideon said, we can start. That night, after Mabel was admitted for observation, Gideon sat alone in his truck outside the clinic with Rivet in the passenger seat. Snow fell lightly through the yellow parking lot lamps. Inside, behind lit windows, nurses moved like shadows from room to room. Gideon rested his hands on the steering wheel and thought of Nora. His sister had been 58 when she died, though in Gideon's mind she was still 30 and laughing at him for folding towels like field gear. She had told him she was fine for months. He had sent checks. He had called between assignments. He had promised to visit when things slowed down. Things never slowed down. Money had reached her. He had not. Rivet laid his grey muzzle on Gideon's sleeve. Gideon closed his eyes. Mabel had said she was fine too. This time, Gideon had 48 hours. A broken house, a frightened puppy, a proud old woman, a nephew trying to love her by taking over, and a town that had remembered her only after the roof nearly fell in. He opened his eyes and looked at the clinic window. He understood now that repairing the heater would be the easy part. The harder task would be helping Mabel without making her feel erased. By the next morning, Gideon Marr had a list. He had written it on the back of an old hardware receipt while sitting in his truck outside the clinic, the words pressed hard enough into the paper to nearly tear it. Heat, vent, roof hazard, smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, clear path, medication station, emergency contact, daily check-in. It looked simple on paper. Most things did before they touched a human life. Mabel Givens had been released from the clinic under conditions sharp enough to cut. She could return home only if the house was temporarily stabilized, only if someone checked on her, only if the damaged heater stayed off until repaired, only if the worst roof hazard was blocked, only if there were working alarms and a plan for emergencies. Temporary. That word had followed Gideon back to the house like a crow. Mabel sat in the passenger seat of Travis Holland's old sedan when they reached the lane, wrapped in her shawl, Cricket asleep against her lap. Travis had insisted on driving her home from the clinic. He drove too carefully, both hands on the wheel, jaw locked, as if one pothole might undo his apology. Gideon arrived ahead of them with Rivet, tools, alarms, boards, a temporary electric heater, and the kind of focus that had once helped him cross rooms where one mistake could kill a man. He moved quickly, too quickly. He measured the ceiling gap, marked the worst part of the floor, opened windows, checked outlets, cleared a path from Mabel's chair to the door, moved a stack of newspapers away from the wall, and dragged a broken chair toward the porch before Mabel even had her coat off. The chair screamed across the floorboards. Mabel made a sound. It was not loud. It was smaller than a protest, sharper than a gasp. Gideon stopped with one hand on the chair back. Mabel stood in the doorway, one palm braced against the frame. Her face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with her heart. "Please don't put that outside," she said. Gideon looked at the chair. One leg had been splintered with a strip of wood. The cushion sagged in the middle. The arms were worn smooth by years of hands. It was a hazard. Anyone could see that. "That leg won't hold much longer," he said. "I know. It could give out under you. I know that too." Then Arthur sat there to peel apples. The sentence entered the room and changed the weight of the chair. Gideon slowly let go. Mabel's fingers tightened around the doorframe. He said, peeling with a knife was proof. God gave men thumbs because he trusted them too much. Every October he sat in that chair with a bucket between his knees and made more mess than pie. Travis looked down at the floor. Otto Blaine, who had just arrived carrying a bundle of trim boards under one arm, stopped on the porch and did not say anything for once. Gideon looked at the chair again. A minute ago it had been an unsafe object. Now it was Arthur. Now it was October. Now it was a man with a knife, a bucket, and a foolish opinion about thumbs. Gideon felt heat rise behind his ribs, not anger but shame. "I'm sorry," he said. Mabel did not answer immediately. She lowered herself carefully into another chair, and Cricket climbed off her lap to settle on her slipper. "You are very good at fixing things, Mr. Marr," she said. "But this house is not only things." That stopped him harder than a shouted order would have. The room held still around her. Rivet stood near the dead heater, watching Gideon with the steady patience of a dog who already knew the lesson and was waiting for the man to catch up. Mabel looked at the newspapers Gideon had stacked near the door. "And those boxes you moved," she added, "the ones by the pantry. Fire hazard," Gideon said, but weaker now. "Seed packets," he turned. Mabel's mouth trembled, though pride kept the rest of her face in place. "Pansies, winter mint, white mums. Some are probably too old to grow, but I kept them because sometimes a person needs to believe something buried can still surprise her." Gideon closed his eyes for one short breath. He thought of Nora's apartment after she died, how he had stood in the middle of it with trash bags, clearing what he thought was clutter, because grief had made him efficient. Receipts, scarves, old mugs, half-finished crossword books. Things he had not understood, because he had come too late to ask what mattered. When he opened his eyes, his list seemed colder than before. He folded it once and put it in his pocket. "All right," he said. Mabel looked wary. "All right, what? All right, we do this your way where we can. My way only where the house is actively trying to kill you." Otto snorted from the porch. "That may be the most romantic thing a man has ever said with a hammer in his hand." Mabel's laugh came out before she could stop it. Even Travis smiled. That was how the work changed. Not slower exactly, but more human. Gideon asked before moving anything. Mabel chose the sitting room as her winter room because it was closest to the heater, the front door, and the window where morning light came in. Gideon braced the ceiling area that had dropped wood the day before, then marked a no-step zone with painter's tape. Otto replaced the worst part of the porch step, and complained the whole time about old houses, new screws, and people who waited until January to admit roofs existed. Travis carried groceries inside, but this time he did not leave them like a thief leaving evidence. He knocked first, stood in front of Mabel, and held the bag in both hands. "I brought soup," he said, "and bread, and batteries, and I'm sorry." Mabel sat wrapped in her shawl, Cricket across her feet. "You said that yesterday. I said it badly. You said it frightened." Travis swallowed. "I worried about you by making you feel like trash," he said. "I don't want to be that man." Mabel studied him. Then she pointed toward the kitchen. "Put the soup where I can reach it, and sit down before that guilt freezes to your face." Travis blinked. "That's it?" "No, you'll drink tea too." He looked genuinely alarmed. "Is it good tea?" "No." Otto laughed so hard he nearly dropped a screwdriver. The tea was winter mint, pale and thin, served in mismatched mugs. Travis drank it like medicine. Mabel watched him suffer with the first visible satisfaction she had shown all morning. By noon, the house no longer felt like a disaster being attacked. It felt like a wounded creature being handled carefully. Gideon installed a carbon monoxide detector near the sleeping area and another alarm in the hallway. He set up a temporary electric heater in the winter room, checked the outlet twice, and made sure the cord lay flat along the wall where Mabel would not trip. He placed her medication in a small plastic box with handwritten labels large enough to read without glasses. Otto mounted a simple handrail near her chair. Travis cleared a narrow path from chair to door, asking about each object before touching it. Cricket followed everyone and helped no one. He stole a glove, barked at a roll of weather stripping, and fell asleep with his chin on Gideon's drill case. Rivet observed him with the weary dignity of a general assigned to train a cloud. In the early afternoon, a rust-colored Subaru pulled into the lane. June Calloway stepped out wearing snow boots, a canvas coat, and a knit cap the color of cranberries. She was 54, tall and broad-hipped, with sun-browned skin, quick dark eyes, and silver threaded through her black braid. She had the calm, amused presence of a woman who had handled frightened dogs, stubborn veterans, runaway goats, and at least one church committee without losing her sense of humor. Gideon had called her from the clinic. June ran a small rescue network 2 towns over and helped train therapy dogs when she was not transporting animals, repairing kennels, or telling people truths they did not want in a voice too warm to resent. She crouched when she entered, letting Cricket approach first. The puppy sniffed her fingers, sneezed, then tried to chew her shoelace. "Ah," June said. "A professional." Mabel looked anxious. "He's not bad." "No, Mom, he's 11 weeks old. That's different." June watched Cricket for several minutes without turning the house into an examination. She observed how he returned to Mabel's feet after every burst of curiosity, how he lifted his head when her breath caught, how Rivet's stillness seemed to steady him. "He isn't a service dog," June said gently. "Not yet, and maybe not ever in the official sense. He's too young for that kind of claim." Mabel's face fell slightly. June held up one hand. "But he is bonded to you, deeply. Some dogs notice changes in breathing, movement, stress. That doesn't make him magic, it makes him attentive. We can build on attentive." Gideon nodded. "Simple tasks." "Very simple," June said. 3 barks when she falls or clutches her chest. Pull a soft cord tied to a bell. Run to the door when called. Stay close without climbing all over her. Cricket chose that moment to put both paws into Mabel's lap and lick her chin. June smiled. "We'll negotiate the climbing." Rivet became the teacher. June used him first, giving a quiet hand signal. Rivet moved to the bell cord Gideon had tied near Mabel's chair and nudged it with his nose. A small brass bell rang once. Cricket jumped backward like the bell had insulted his ancestors. Mabel burst into laughter. The sound filled the sitting room in a way the temporary heater could not. It did not erase the mold stains, the taped-off floor, the bills on the table, or the county deadline. But it moved through the house like a match struck in darkness. They tried again. Rivet nudged the cord. Bell. Cricket barked at Rivet. June praised him anyway for being alive and involved. The third time, Cricket grabbed the cord with his teeth and pulled so hard the bell swung wildly, ringing again and again. Otto covered his ears. "If that thing saves her, it'll kill the rest of us." Mabel laughed until tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. "If my life depends on Cricket, at least I'll be rescued with music." For the first time since Gideon had met her, Mabel looked less like a woman being pushed toward loss, and more like a woman sitting inside her own life again. That evening, after June left a short practice plan, and Otto took Travis to fetch more boards, the house quieted. Gideon stayed to check the alarms one more time. Mabel insisted on making tea. He nearly refused, then remembered the chair, so he sat. She brought him winter mint tea in a chipped mug. It was weak enough that Gideon suspected the water had only heard rumors of leaves. He drank it anyway. Mabel watched him over the rim of her own cup. It isn't strong. No, it's only warm. That counts. She looked toward the window, where snow had begun to fall again, soft and uncertain. Some days that is all a person can offer. Gideon held the mug in both hands. He thought of Nora again. Not the death, not the guilt, but a smaller memory. Nora standing in her kitchen years ago, holding out a mug of something herbal he had mocked on sight. He had been leaving for another assignment. He had said he had no time. He wondered now how many cups of weak tea a man could refuse before life stopped offering them. I had a sister, he said. Mabel did not turn. Had? Yes. She liked tea. She liked being asked to make it. Mabel nodded as though that made perfect sense. Gideon looked down into the pale water. I sent money when I should have come home. The admission hung between them. Mabel did not comfort him quickly. That was a mercy. After a while she said, money can help a roof. It cannot sit in a chair. Gideon closed his eyes. Cricket, who had been sleeping near Mabel's slipper, suddenly lifted his head. At first Gideon thought the puppy had heard a car, but Rivet did not move toward the door. Instead, Rivet watched Cricket. The little dog stood, sniffed the air, then toddled toward the corner near the pantry where the old boxes had been moved. He scratched once at the floorboard, then harder. Then with both front paws, frantic and focused. Cricket, Mabel said. Leave that. He did not. The sound changed from playful scraping to desperate digging. Gideon rose and crossed the room. One floorboard near the pantry was slightly warped, its edge darker than the rest. Cricket pressed his nose to the gap and whined. Mabel's face had gone still. Not confused, not annoyed, afraid. Gideon looked at her. Do you know what's under there? For a moment Mabel did not answer. Then she whispered, that can't be. He knelt, worked his fingers under the loose board and lifted. Beneath it, wrapped in brittle cloth and dust, sat a small rusted tin box. The room went silent. Mabel stared at it as if the dead had knocked from under the floor. For a long moment, no one touched the tin box. It sat beneath the lifted floorboard, like something the house had been keeping in its mouth for years, rusted at the corners, wrapped in brittle cloth, smelling faintly of dust, old paper, and the kind of damp that never fully left a winter room. Cricket stood beside it with both front paws planted wide, proud and puzzled, as if he had performed an important duty, but did not know why everyone had gone quiet. Rivet watched from near the doorway. The old shepherd's scarred ear tilted forward, but he did not move. He had the solemn stillness of a witness. Mabel sat in her chair with the shawl around her shoulders and one hand pressed to her mouth. Her face had gone pale, not with sickness this time, but with recognition. I thought Arthur put it in the attic, she whispered. Gideon looked from her to the box. Do you want me to leave it? No. Her voice trembled. No, if the house gave it back, I suppose I ought to look. Otto Blaine knelt with a grunt and eased the box free. For once, he did not make a joke about old wood or bad storage. His big hands, usually rough with boards and bolts, handled the tin as if it were a sleeping bird. Travis stood near the kitchen, arms folded tight. Since his apology, he seemed unsure where to place himself in Mabel's home. He was not quite a guest, not quite forgiven, not quite outside anymore. Cricket trotted to him, sniffed his boot, then returned to Mabel, leaving Travis with the wounded expression of a man who had been judged by a puppy and found still under review. Mabel took the box into her lap. The lid resisted. Gideon offered his pocket knife, but she shook her head and worked at it with her thumbs until the rust gave way with a dry little pop. Inside were envelopes, seed packets, photographs, and a small notebook wrapped in faded blue cloth. Mabel touched the cloth first. The gesture was so gentle that Gideon looked away for a second. There were some kinds of tenderness a stranger had no right to stare at too directly. When she opened the notebook, a few pressed petals slid onto her lap. Purple, white, brown with age. Not money, Otto muttered, peering over. I was hoping for money. Would simplified the day. Mabel gave him a look. If I had hidden money under the floor, Otto Blaine, I would not have been drinking tea thin enough to insult water. Fair point. But her smile faded as she turned the first page. Names filled the paper in careful handwriting. Dates, flower names, short notes. Mabel read silently at first, then aloud. Violet Holland, November 14. Purple pansy pot, no charge. Boy at the door had red eyes and would not take both hands from his coat pockets. Travis stopped breathing. The room shifted around him. Mabel looked up slowly. Violet was your mother? Travis did not answer right away. His face had gone slack, as if some old door inside him had opened without permission. I remember that pot, he said. It was on our porch after the funeral. Dad said some church lady left it. I thought. He swallowed. I thought it was magic. Stupid kid thing. Mabel's eyes softened. Not stupid. Travis looked at the notebook, then at Mabel, and the anger he had worn for years seemed suddenly too large for him. "I yelled at you," he said. "You did. You brought my mother flowers." Yes, he pressed a hand over his mouth. No one rescued him from the shame. That, Gideon thought, was right. Some shame was not meant to crush a man. Some shame was the soul finding its proper shape again. Mabel turned another page. Ruth Blaine, February 2nd. White chrysanthemums left by side door. Otto hates sympathy. Otto made a sound that was not quite a cough. Mabel looked at him. Still true. Sympathy's usually noisy, Otto said, his voice rough. Chrysanthemums kept their mouths shut. His eyes shone, but he turned away toward the window and pretended to inspect a crack in the frame. The notebook went on. A bundle of winter mint left for a man trying to stop drinking. Seed packets sent to the elementary school after the third-grade class lost its little greenhouse to frost. A yellow ribbon of dried flowers for a wedding where the bride's father had been too sick to attend. A jar of mint tea for a woman after surgery. A small wreath for a baby who had lived only 9 days. It was not a ledger of debt. It was a map of quiet mercy. For years, Mabel had been carrying color into houses where words had failed. She had stood at doors with flowers, because flowers could say, "I remember. I'm sorry. Come back to us. Hold on one more day," without making proud people answer. And now the town had nearly let the woman of flowers freeze in a room with a broken heater. No one said that aloud. They did not need to. By afternoon, the notebook's existence had traveled farther than Gideon expected. Not as gossip exactly. More like a bell heard through snow. Travis told the store owner. Otto told no one, and somehow 3 people knew. June Calloway called to ask if the bell cord had been installed and went quiet when Gideon mentioned the notebook. Within 2 hours, a woman from the school sent over a box of sealed window plastic. Someone else left a stack of dry firewood near the porch. A neighbor Gideon had not met placed a casserole on the steps and fled before anyone could thank her. Gideon stood at the door and watched the offerings gather. Mabel saw them too. Her expression tightened. "I will not be made into a poor old saint," she said. "No," Gideon replied. "You'd be unbearable." That surprised a laugh out of her. Then he made the rule. No one entered the house like they were delivering charity to a disaster. Anyone who came had to knock. Anyone who moved something had to ask. Anyone who accepted Mabel's tea had to drink it all, no matter what crime the mint had committed against flavor. Otto approved of the rule because it punished generosity with tea. Travis volunteered to enforce it at the door, which Mabel allowed after making him drink a second cup. The inspection came sooner than planned. The forecast had turned ugly again. Another storm pushing down from Lake Superior, and Clara Voss arrived before sunset with her tablet, her ash-blonde hair tucked beneath a wool cap, and practical snow boots that looked chosen by a woman who had stopped trusting weather in her 20s. Dane Givens came behind her in a dark coat, carrying a folder he kept opening and closing without reading. He looked at the repaired step, the temporary roof brace, the blocked hazard area, the new alarms, the clear path to the door, the medication box, the electric heater set safely along the wall, the bell cord near Mabel's chair. Then he looked at the sagging corners of the house. Gideon could almost see the war inside him. Dane did not want to be cruel. That made him harder to hate and harder to bear. He had the strained face of a man who had imagined too many bad phone calls and was trying to prevent all of them by force. Clara inspected without drama. She tested the carbon monoxide detector, checked the smoke alarm, photographed the braced ceiling area, asked about clinic follow-up, confirmed the heater remained shut off, and reviewed the daily check-in plan Gideon had written with Travis, Otto, June, and Dane's number added in reluctant ink. "This is temporary stabilization," Clara said. "Yes," Gideon said. "Not full repair. No. Roof still needs professional work. Heating system needs licensed repair or replacement. Electrical should be reviewed." "Yes," Dane folded his arms. "So it isn't safe." Clara looked at him. "It is safer than yesterday. That matters." "But safe enough," Mabel, who had been sitting quietly with cricket across her slippers, pushed herself up from the chair. Gideon turned immediately. "Mabel, I am not a sack of flour," she said. "If my future is being discussed, I'll stand in it." Cricket rose with her. Rivet rose too. Mabel walked to the doorway between the sitting room and the kitchen. Her steps were careful, one hand brushing the wall for balance. "Dane, I know you're frightened." His face tightened. "I am not frightened," he said. Mabel gave him the look of a woman who had once seen him at 8 years old with jam on his shirt and a frog in his pocket. "You are terrified." Dane said nothing. "You want to put me somewhere clean and bright because clean and bright feels like love when you are afraid. I understand that." Her breath caught slightly. But this house has my dead in it, my flowers, my mistakes, my Arthur. If you carry me away from every hard thing, you may keep my body safe and still leave me nowhere to live." Dane's folder lowered by an inch. Gideon saw his own guilt reflected there and looked away. Then Mabel's hand tightened on the doorframe. Cricket barked once. Everyone turned. Mabel blinked as if the room had tipped. Her other hand moved to her chest. Cricket barked again. Then a third time. Not wild, not panicked. 3 clear, sharp sounds that struck the room like a small bell finding its voice. The puppy grabbed the soft cord tied near the chair and pulled. The brass bell rang, bright and uneven. Then Cricket ran to Gideon and caught the cuff of his jeans gently between his teeth. Rivet moved at once, not toward Mabel, but across the room, placing his body between her and the cluster of people who had instinctively surged forward. "Give her space," Gideon said. His voice cut through the room. Travis was already dialing the clinic. Clara stepped back, eyes sharp, watching not a miracle but a plan being used. Dane dropped the folder and reached Mabel just as Gideon guided her into the chair. "Aunt Mabel," Dane said, and all the authority had gone from him. He sounded young. Mabel breathed shallowly, eyes closed, one hand gripping his. "I'm here," Dane said. "I'm here." That was the first useful thing he had said all day. Cricket climbed onto her slipper and pressed against her ankle. Rivet remained standing guard, steady and old and certain. Travis spoke into the phone, giving symptoms, timing, and Dr. Renner's name with a precision that surprised Gideon. Clara checked the medication plan. Gideon followed the clinic's instructions and watched Mabel's color slowly improve. The episode passed. Not easily, not prettily, but it passed. When Mabel opened her eyes, Dane was still kneeling beside her. "You dropped your folder," she whispered. He laughed once, brokenly, and lowered his forehead to her hand. Clara waited several minutes before speaking. When she did, her voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but more human around the edges. "What I saw," she said, "was not a puppy replacing medical care. I want that clear." June would have liked that sentence, Gideon thought. Clara continued. "What I saw was an emergency plan. A dog responding to a cue we can document as supportive behavior. A clear path, a bell, a medication box, people who know who to call, a daily check-in schedule, a house still needing repairs but no longer being ignored." Dane looked up. Clara met his eyes. "I can approve, Mrs. Given's remaining here under temporary conditions, provided the follow-up repairs are completed, the clinic clears the plan, and someone checks in daily." Mabel closed her eyes. Not in defeat, in relief. Dane sat back on his heels, breathing hard. "I don't like it." "I know," Clara said. He looked at Mabel, then at Cricket, then at Gideon. "I still think she should be somewhere safer." Mabel squeezed his hand. "Then help make here safer." The words found him. Slowly, painfully, Dane nodded. That evening, after Clara left her written conditions and Travis drove to the store for more batteries, the house felt different. Not fixed, not saved in the shiny way people like to tell stories, but gathered, as if the scattered pieces of a life had been placed in a circle and asked to hold. Mabel opened the tin box again and took out a small packet of pansy seeds. The paper faded soft at the edges. She handed it to Gideon. "For your cabin," she said. "I don't grow flowers." "I know, that is why you need them." He looked at the packet. Purple pansies, winter hardy. Mabel leaned back, tired but peaceful. "Spring doesn't come because snow is kind," she said. "It comes because something stubborn decides to rise anyway." Gideon held the seeds in his palm. He had come to brace a roof, stop a leak, install alarms, and keep a woman from being removed from her home. Yet somewhere in the work, Mabel had begun repairing a place in him that no tool had ever reached. As he prepared to leave, she looked toward him with an expression too, knowing for a woman who had supposedly heard very little. "If your sister were still here," Mabel asked softly, "would you sit down and drink the tea this time?" Gideon went still. He had not told Mabel enough for her to know the shape of that wound. Then Cricket stirred in his sleep and placed one paw over the edge of the seed packet in Gideon's hand. Gideon looked from the puppy to the old woman and understood that grief did not need to be spoken plainly to leave tracks across a room. "Yes," he said at last. Mabel nodded. "Good," she said. "Then don't waste the next cup life hands you." Winter did not leave Kettlewick Falls all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old fist remembering how to open. Snow still clung to the north sides of roofs. Ice still held in the shaded ditches. The pines around Mabel Givens's house still wore white along their lower branches, but the light had changed. It came through the trees thinner, higher, less cruel. From Mabel's porch, meltwater dripped in silver threads. The house was not beautiful in the way magazines meant beautiful. The siding still needed paint. One gutter still leaned with the stubbornness of a man refusing advice. The patched roof showed its scars, but smoke rose from the chimney now, safe and steady. The front step held. The window glass had been sealed. In the sitting room, the winter corner held warmth like a cupped hand. On the sill, 3 small pansy pots faced the weak sun. Mabel had insisted on those first. People worry too much about roofs, she had said, settling one purple bloom into a chipped clay pot. A roof keeps rain off your head. Flowers remind your head why it wants to stay dry. Gideon Marr had not argued. He had learned better. He stood that morning near the porch rail, with a bundle of narrow boards under one arm, watching Cricket attempt to intimidate a melting snow clump. The little German shepherd had grown in small, uneven ways over the past weeks. His paws were still too large, his ears still undecided, and his red collar had been replaced with a new one that Mabel claimed was dignified. Cricket wore it with the solemn pride of a mayor receiving office. Rivet lay nearby in the pale sun, black and gold coat brushed clean, silver muzzle resting on his paws. The old shepherd watched Cricket's battle with the snow clump and blinked with ancient disappointment. "You could help him," Gideon said. Rivet did not move. "Fair." Inside, Mabel was arguing with Dane Givens over a cardboard box of flower pots. Dane had been coming twice a week since Clara Voss approved the temporary home plan, and each visit seemed to sand a little more fear from him. He still looked too neat for the place, with his pressed coats and careful shoes, but his sleeves were rolled up now, and there was potting soil on one cuff. "I can carry that," he said. "You can carry the heavy one," Mabel answered. "This is my box. It has 12 pots in it. It has 12 small pots in it." "Aunt Mabel, Dane." Gideon heard the silence after that and smiled before he could stop himself. Dane appeared in the doorway holding the heavier box, his sandy brown hair falling loose over his forehead. He had the faintly stunned look of a man who had discovered that caring for an elderly relative involved losing several arguments before breakfast. "She's impossible," Dane said. "She's alive," Gideon replied. Dane looked back into the house. His expression softened. Yeah, that was the difference now. Fear still lived in him, but it no longer drove every word. The spring market was scheduled for noon at the Kettlewick Falls Community Hall. It was not a grand event. A few folding tables, local bread, preserves, knitted hats no one needed until next winter, donated books, and whatever crafts people had made while snow kept them indoors. But for Mabel, it felt like walking back into a town that had last seen her with a puppy hidden against her chest and shame wrapped around her like a second coat. "I don't have to go," she said from inside. Gideon stepped into the doorway. "No." She looked up from tying a ribbon around a small bundle of dried winter mint. Her old coat had been mended with neat patches of blue and brown cloth. The repairs should have made it look poorer. Somehow they made it look claimed. "I could just send the flowers." "You could. And the tea." "You could. And the dog blankets." "You could." She narrowed her eyes. "You have become irritatingly agreeable. I've been trained." Cricket trotted to Mabel's feet and sat. He looked up at her with the serious amber gaze that had, more than once, changed the direction of a whole room. Mabel touched his head. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose I should go myself." The community hall smelled of coffee, cinnamon rolls, waxed floors, and wet wool. Sunlight entered through high windows and fell across rows of tables. People turned when Mabel came in, but not with the sharp curiosity she feared. They looked, then softened. Some smiled. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked away because memory had reached them before courage did. Travis Holland was there early, setting up a small table near the entrance. He wore a clean flannel shirt instead of his store uniform, but his hands kept moving, as if still nervous behind a checkout counter. When he saw Mabel, he straightened so quickly he nearly knocked over a stack of paper bags. "Mrs. Givens," he said. "Your table's by the window. Better light." Mabel looked at him. "For the flowers?" "For you," Travis said, then immediately seemed to regret sounding sincere. Otto Blaine stood beside the coffee urn wearing a wool vest, suspenders, and his usual expression of personal offense. His red-grey beard had been combed, which made him look less like a man and more like a badly behaved broom. "I told them not to put you near the door," Otto said. "Draft'll kill the pansies before the customers do." "Good morning to you too, Otto," Mabel said. "It isn't good. It's damp." "Then buy a flower and improve it," Otto grunted. "Extortion by plant. Very modern." He bought the first pot anyway. He chose a white chrysanthemum, though he pretended not to notice which one his hand reached for. Gideon saw him hold it a moment too long before carrying it away. A woman with silver hair bought the next pot for her kitchen window. Travis bought a purple pansy and placed it beside the donation jar at his table. Dane bought nothing, because Mabel told him family did not get to pretend purchases were support when they already owed labor. By midday, Mabel had sold nearly half her flowers. She did not glow. People in stories glowed too often. Mabel simply sat straighter. Each time someone paid her, asked her advice about light or watering, or remembered a flower she had once grown, a little more of her returned to her face. June Calloway had set up a table near the wall with emergency bells, large print medication charts, carbon monoxide detector pamphlets, and pet care winter checklists. She wore her cranberry knit cap even indoors, her black braid tucked over one shoulder, and spoke to everyone with brisk warmth. "No," June told an elderly man holding up a bell cord. "This is not for calling your wife when you want pie. This is for emergencies." The man looked disappointed. His wife bought 2. Cricket watched June demonstrate the bell and barked once, as if offering professional commentary. Rivet lay under Mabel's table, steady and dignified, though a toddler had already tried to feed him part of a cinnamon roll. Rivet had accepted it with moral complexity. Then Gideon noticed Travis slip out, not far, just through the side door toward the market across the street. A few minutes later, through the hall window, Gideon saw him inside North Lantern Market, standing near the front entrance with a shelf he had built from rough pine. The sign above it was hand-painted, the letters uneven but careful. Warm shelf. Under it sat soup cans, bread, crackers, dog food, batteries, hand warmers, and basic over-the-counter medicine. A second line on the sign read, "If you have extra, leave one. If you need one, take one. No questions." Travis stood staring at it like a man unsure whether a small shelf could forgive a large mistake. Mabel had seen it too. She did not speak. Her hand found Cricket's head and rested there. For a long moment, the bustle of the hall continued around them. Coffee poured, children laughed, people counted change. But in that quiet pocket by the window, Gideon saw Mabel's eyes fill. Not with humiliation this time, with something harder for her to accept. Proof that the town had not only remembered, it had begun to change its habits. The moment did not announce itself. No one clapped. No one made a speech. But Gideon felt it pass through the room like a door opening in a house, thought locked for years. Shortly after, Mabel stood to wrap a bundle of mint for a young mother with a baby on her hip. She smiled, answered a question about window light, and reached for the twine. Then her hand stopped. The color slipped from her mouth. Cricket was on his feet before anyone else noticed. 1 bark. People nearby turned. 2. Mabel pressed her palm to her chest. 3. The third bark cut through the hall cleanly. Not frantic, not confused. A sound learned through practice, fear, and love. Cricket ran to Travis first, catching his sleeve in his teeth. Travis dropped the paper bag he was folding and moved immediately. "Mrs. Givens," he called. Rivet rose under the table and stepped outward, placing his body between Mabel and the crowd that began to gather. Gideon reached her chair before it tipped, guiding her down slowly. "Give her room," he said. His voice carried, and the room obeyed. Dane was beside them with the medication pouch before anyone asked. June knelt at Mabel's other side, calm and focused, checking her breathing and asking simple questions. Travis called the clinic and gave the details clearly. Chest tightness, alert, seated, medication available, Dr. Renner's patient. Mabel closed her eyes for several seconds. Cricket pressed against her ankle, shaking but staying. Rivet stood watch. The episode eased within minutes, though the hall remained quiet longer than necessary. People had seen the system work. Not magic, not a miracle replacing medicine. A puppy noticed. A man listened. A nephew brought medicine. A trainer kept calm. A former SEAL made space. A town did not look away. Mabel opened her eyes. "Did I ruin the market?" she asked. Otto exhaled loudly. "Yes, entire economy collapsed. Cinnamon rolls worthless now." Someone laughed. Then another person. The fear loosened. Mabel looked down at Cricket. "Good boy." Cricket wagged once, then sneezed with the emotional timing of a comedian. The market did not end after that. That mattered. Mabel stayed seated, drank water, let June fuss only as much as necessary, and sold the last of her flowers from the chair. People came by more gently now, not pitying but present. By late afternoon, the warm shelf sign had gained its first additions from other hands. 2 cans of beans, a bag of rice, a pair of wool socks, a small bottle of dish soap, and a note written in a child's pencil that said, "For someone cold." Clara Voss arrived near closing, not with a clipboard this time, but with a stack of printed check-in sheets, and the look of a woman pretending paperwork had not made her emotional. She pinned one sheet beside Travis' warm shelf. Names, days, needs, offers, who needed wood stacked, who needed a ride to the clinic, who could repair steps, who could bring soup after a storm, who should be checked on if the temperature dropped below 0. Mabel studied the sheet. Under needs help, her name had already been written by Dane. Heat repairs, roof follow-up, medication pickup. She took the pencil from Clara and added her name again under can offer. Window flowers, dog blankets, winter mint tea. Travis leaned over and whispered, "You sure about the tea?" Mabel did not look up. "The tea builds character. It built something. I'm not sure character was it." Gideon laughed before he could stop himself. That evening, after the hall emptied and the last pot was packed, they returned to Mabel's house. The sky had turned pale gold behind the pines. The air still carried cold, but it no longer felt like a verdict. Mabel sat on the porch chair Arthur had once used, the repaired leg braced securely now. Cricket climbed onto her feet and dropped his head across both slippers. Rivet settled beside the steps. Gideon stood at the rail holding leftover boards for the fence. Mabel looked at him. "Do you feel guilty? For what? For telling me you could take Cricket for a few days when you had no intention of separating him from me?" Gideon considered lying politely. He decided against it. "No." Her eyebrows lifted. "I think," he said, "some words are not meant to steal the truth. Some only open a door so the truth can get inside." Mabel watched the trees for a while, then she smiled. "That sounds like something a man says after drinking terrible tea." It was educational. Cricket sighed in his sleep. Rivet's ears flicked toward the woods, then settled again. The little house behind them creaked as the evening cooled, old and imperfect and alive. It would need more work. So would Mabel's heart. So would Dane's fear, Travis's shame, Gideon's grief, and the town's habit of noticing too late. But no one was pretending one good day fixed a life. That was why the day mattered. Gideon looked at the smoke rising steady from the chimney, at the flowers on the sill, at the puppy, who had once almost been given away because love had become too expensive to keep. Not every mission ended with gunfire. Some ended with a warm shelf, a list of names, a porch that held, and an old woman who did not have to trade love for a loaf of bread. Mabel closed her eyes, one hand resting on Cricket's back. And for the first time in a long while, the house did not sound like it was trying to survive the winter. It sounded like it expected spring. Sometimes God does not send miracles with thunder, fire, or a voice from the sky. Sometimes he sends them quietly through a trembling puppy in the arms of an old woman, through a loyal dog who hears danger before anyone else, through a stranger who chooses not to walk away, and through a town that finally remembers how to knock on the door before it is too late. Mabel did not need people to take her love away in the name of saving her. She needed someone to help her keep what made life worth waking up for. Gideon thought he came to fix a heater, patch a roof, and return a bottle of medicine. But in the end, he discovered that the deepest repairs are not always made with tools. Some are made with patience, humility, forgiveness, and the courage to sit beside someone before trying to solve their pain. In our daily lives, there may be people around us just like Mabel. An elderly neighbor who says she is fine, a quiet man who never asks for help, a tired cashier carrying grief behind a hard voice, a family member who is trying to protect someone but does not know how to listen. And sometimes the miracle God asks us to become is not something grand. It may be a warm meal, a phone call, a repaired step, a bag of groceries, a gentle apology, or simply the choice to stay when leaving would be easier. This story reminds us that kindness is never small when God places it in the right hands. A single act of mercy can become shelter. A faithful dog can become a warning bell. A forgotten woman can become the reason a whole town learns how to love better. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of a person or pet who helped you through a difficult season. And if you believe stories of faith, loyalty, healing, and second chances still matter, please subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort every lonely heart, and remind you tonight that even in the coldest winter, His mercy can still find your door.